Welcome back. Let's just do an exercise together. We've got an article that I want you to read. This is an experimental course, and so experimental courses are meant to experiment. So we've provided you a number of things to read, and I have no idea whether you're reading them or not. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to together go through what I consider to be, for you, the most important summaries of important concepts related to specifically ethnographic work provided by Raymer's chapter Ethnographic Research in Lapan, which is a book that I've referred to a few times. It's on the Google Drive. So what we're going to do together is I'm going to rip through or click through the parts of this chapter which does a particularly good task at pulling together using all of the big words and important concepts that I've individually been introducing to you in separate lectures. It talks about gatekeepers, it talks about ethics, it talks about research questions, it talks about rapport, it talks about all sorts of stuff. It's a nice summary, it's a short summary which brings together definitions of the most important concepts that I'm trying to introduce you to. Now remember, the word repetition and reinforcing are not the same. If you think you've got your head around how qualitative research is different from quantitative, and within the qualitative camp are what specifically ethnographic research is, then you may not feel like you need to read this article and you don't need to watch this lecture. That's completely up to you. So let's go to full screen, and I'm just going to introduce you to what I consider to be the most important and most useful summaries about this important topic provided in this chapter by Frances Raymer. So she begins with some personal information about her own research background, similar to the way that I've talked to you about my own research background. And she makes the following comment, which I think is very, very helpful. These two projects illustrate a basic tenet of ethnographic research. A researcher must be able not only to make the strange familiar, but also to make the familiar strange. In other words, as an ethnographer, my task in Botswana is to make what I find there, the strange, understandable towards people living outside of Botswana. My challenge in investigating welfare to work transitions, however, that was in the United States, was to make the ordinary strange to those who go to work in similar situations every day. Making the strange familiar and the familiar strange is a way of highlighting the intriguing nature of culture. We take our culture for granted to such a degree that most times we don't even recognise that what we do is cultural. And at the same time, we find others' culture so strange that we have trouble making sense of their practices. In order to truly understand a cultural group or phenomenon, ethnographers must make cultural practices both accessible to those outside the group and identifiable as cultural to those inside the group. What is ethnographic research? This is a really nice summary, a systematic study of a particular group or phenomenon. It is the primary research methodology of anthropologists. It seeks to answer anthropological questions concerning the ways of life of living human beings. Ethnographic research is also conducted by other social scientists, including cultural studies, linguistics, health, and criminology. Historical ethnography has been defined in ways that focus on both the what and the how. You've heard me refer to Clifford Geertz before, a famous American anthropologist, and he famously differentiated ethnographic research with other kinds of research, not by its methods, but by its elaborate venture into what he called thick descriptions, which was an action, practice, or event, and the meaning and symbolic importance given to it by members of a particular cultural society. So Geertz, he differentiates between a wink, a blink, and a twitch. All of these look similar, but their meanings are vastly different and are only understood within a broader concept. Thick description suggests that ethnography goes a step further than simply describing. Now, describing is important, but ethnographers go further than describing by talking about cultural interpretation, defined as involving the ability to describe what the researcher has heard and seen within the framework of the social group's view of reality. Interpretation of culture in this thick description, these are the words of Geertz and his school, requires both an insider's or emic perspective of outsider or etic perspective. So emic means insider, etic means outsider. The value of insider perspectives is, unlike respondents who respond to survey questions, or subjects who are the subject of an experiment, participants in ethnographic research are what we call informants, who tell you what they think you need to know about their culture. In order to craft descriptions of cultural events and cultural practices, an ethnographer studies real people doing what they do to meet the everyday demands with which they are confronted. That is to say, ethnography is naturalistic. And we're going to be talking quite a lot about the idea of a naturalistic research approach. This is another word that we can use, which is kind of a lens that helps us really understand the distinctive characteristics of ethnographic research. How do ethnographers start? So these days, what is important is that ethnographers often start with a focus on a problem in which a particular problem or topic or general or interest guides the entire research endeavour. Such problems are guided and propelled by a specific set of research questions. Remember, these words are very important. We must understand the difference between a research problem and a research question. As Margaret Mead, whom we have talked about a lot in the course, explained about her own ethnographic research in Samoa, I've tried to answer the question which sent me to Samoa. Are the disturbances which vex our adolescence due to the nature of adolescence itself or the civilization? That was her research problem. That was her problem focus. Along with logical opportunities and constraints, research problems shape the decisions of Mead, like other ethnographers, made about the location of their fieldwork, the focus of their study, and their data collection methods, because the ethnographic research involved extended fieldwork, ethnographers must identify and gain access to a field setting that will provide data sufficient to answer their research questions. So, for example, Mead travelled to Samoa to collect data that would answer her question. Access, whether in a Pacific village or a community centre and researching one's own neighbourhood, also involves consent in support of gatekeepers, individuals who control access to some thing or some place. Ethnographic research differs from many other kinds of research in both length and depth of relationship with informants. Remember, we don't talk about subjects like we would if I was doing medical research. These are informants. Ethnographers have a distinctive obligation to the people they are studying. Anthropologists abide by a set of ethics developed in advance by the American Anthropological Association. And that includes needing to get informed consent. Ethnographers can request that oral informed consent be considered sufficient. In addition, the ethnographer may also guarantee the confidentiality of all research participants, and that they will neither be harmed nor exploited by their participation. So informed consent comes in a number of forms, shapes and forms, and in some parts of Southeast Asia, it is important to explain orally your intention. Sometimes if you want to use pictures, including individuals, publishers will insist that you get written informed consent. But let's read on. What do ethnographers do? How do ethnographers gather these multiple perspectives, the emic perspectives and the etic perspectives? Well, the answer to that question is that we engage in field work. We collect data in natural settings to document beliefs and practices from a people's point of view. Ethnographic research is different from other forms of research, and in that fieldwork, so essential to ethnography, is conducted in situ, which means in the place or the setting or settings themselves. Basic to the fieldwork approach is the tenet that individuals' beliefs and actions, they cannot be detached from the context in where they are happening. So we've heard some references to Margaret Mead. We've got some more reminders of the context that Malinowski came, that he worked in context despite the fact that at the time there were armchair anthropologists. Because ethnographic research is conducted in an actual context in which the practices of interest are taking place, ethnographers spend a great deal of time in the field, what we call the field. The rule is the time in the field should consist at least one full cycle of activities. So if you were doing an ethnography on harvesting, if there was an agricultural cycle, if there was a cycle of festivals, that it was important to be there for one cycle. It is often the case that people conduct field research for 1 year depending on the study. So it is in situ, and it must be long enough for it to see a full cycle of activities. The long-term intensive nature of fieldwork is unique and rewarding, and it can also be uncomfortable, frustrating, and full of anxiety. So some anthropologists have written, field researchers have in common the tendency to immerse themselves for the sake of science in situations that all but a tiny minority of humankind goes to great lengths to avoid. Finding a place amongst a people to whom you are a stranger and asking them questions that might seem too personal can certainly feel awkward. He goes on, they go on to identify 4 stages of field work, and I think these summaries are very, very helpful for us for the purposes of this course. We enter the field, we learn how to play one's role there, and whether that of a researcher or someone else. We maintain and survive the relationships that emerge, and we leave the setting. And each of these 4 stages requires a unique social skills from ethnographers. In the growing literature on fieldwork experiences, and we will be pointing you in the direction of other places you can be reading this, ethnographers seem to agree that the social dimension of data collection is usually inconvenient, sometimes physically uncomfortable, frequently embarrassing, and to a degree also tense. Well, let's pull out a full screen now, and I think that what we'll do is we're going to carry on the second part of this lecture, analysing and summarising what to me looks like the main points in this chapter.